My wife cheated on me with her boss, then stole $250, $0 from our joint account and filed for divorce, claiming I'm abusive. Now she's trying to take my family home valued at $1.2 million, and I just found out she's secretly been planning to move to another country with the kids. It started with little things, small signs that I probably should have paid more attention to, but I didn't want to believe. My wife Emily always seemed a little distant lately. She'd be on her phone more than usual, texting late into the night, and sometimes she'd get defensive if I asked what she was doing. I thought maybe she was just stressed at work or dealing with the kids. We'd been together for over 10 years, and honestly, I thought I knew her inside out. But looking back, there were cracks I ignored. One day, I noticed her phone was left unattended on the kitchen counter. I glanced at the screen out of curiosity, and there it was, messages from her boss, Mark. Nothing overtly explicit, but enough to make my stomach turn. Flirty comments, little inside jokes that sounded too intimate, and a string of emojis. That felt off. I shrugged it off at first, telling myself I was overreacting. Maybe I was just imagining things. But then came the small things, her phone disappearing for hours, her sudden change in mood, and her lying about where she was going when I asked. I caught her in a lie about work trips, and it didn't sit right. I started snooping, not proud of it, but I needed to know. One night I hacked into her email, something I never thought I'd do, and found the emails. There were dozens of them, exchanged in secret, full of flirtation, plans to meet up, and even talk about what they'd do if they were alone. My heart sank. That's when I realized it wasn't just an affair, it was something more. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. The betrayal cut deep, but what hurt even more was the blatant disrespect. My wife Emily was always bitchy, sharp-tongued, dismissive, and quick to dismiss my feelings. She'd call me paranoid or insecure whenever I brought up her behavior, say I was overreacting. But now I saw the truth. She'd been cheating on me with her boss, Mark, for months. That's why she'd been so distant, so cold. She'd been sneaking around behind my back, and I had no idea. The worst part, I found out she'd been planning this all along. She secretly opened a bank account under her name, separate from ours, and had been funneling money into it. I discovered over $250, $0 missing from our joint account. That's $250,000 gone. She'd been stealing from us, planning to start a new life with Mark, probably in another country. I couldn't believe it. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted, had been lying to me for years. I confronted her that night. I laid everything out, showed her the emails, the bank statements, the evidence I'd gathered. Her face twisted into a sneer. She denied everything at first, calling me crazy, accusing me of paranoia, saying I was just jealous. When I pressed harder, she finally broke down and admitted she'd been having an affair, but she insisted it was just sex, that she didn't love Mark, that she was only doing it because she felt neglected. She threw in that I was abusive, that I'd been controlling and mean, trying to turn the tables on me like I was the villain. I was numb. I'd never felt so betrayed in my life. My wife, the woman I'd built a life with, was sleeping with her boss, stealing from us, and plotting to leave everything behind. The anger was overwhelming, but beneath it there was a deep sadness, because I loved her, or at least I thought I did. Now, I wasn't sure who she was anymore. I felt like I'd been living in a nightmare, and I didn't know how to wake up. All I knew was that my world was falling apart, and I was left to pick up the pieces. After that confrontation, everything changed. I remember sitting in the living room, staring at the evidence I'd gathered, screenshots, bank statements, emails, and feeling like I was watching someone else's life. The room felt cold, empty, even though my kids were upstairs sleeping. I kept asking myself how I missed all the signs, how I could have been so blind. For years, I'd been the one working hard, providing for the family, and I thought I was the one who kept us safe. Turns out, I was just a blind husband, completely unaware that my wife was planning her escape and screwing around right under my nose. The next morning, I knew I had to act. I couldn't let her get away with stealing our money, lying to my face, and trying to destroy everything I'd worked for. I started calling my lawyer, trying to get a grip on what I could do legally. It was surreal. My wife was filing for divorce, claiming I was abusive and trying to claim our family home, which is worth about $1.2 million. She said I'd been controlling, that I'd hit her, that I was violent. None of it was true. I've never laid a finger on her, but she's good at twisting stories. She always was. I knew her plan was to leave the country with the kids. I found out she'd been secretly talking to an immigration lawyer, trying to set up a new life abroad, maybe in Canada or somewhere far away where I wouldn't find her. She'd even made arrangements to take the kids without my knowledge. That was the moment I realized I had to act fast. I couldn't let her just take everything and run, not without a fight. I decided to dig into her plans more. I hired a private investigator, and what I found was shocking. She'd been meeting with her lawyer, preparing documents, and even making arrangements to transfer the house into her name. She had a whole plan mapped out. She was going to leave me with nothing, the kids in tow, and start over somewhere else. I couldn't believe she'd go so far. All the years we'd built this life, and she was ready to throw it away for some affair and a quick escape. I also discovered she'd been siphoning money into a secret account, more than I initially thought. It wasn't just the $250, $0. She'd been moving money around for months, possibly more. That's when I realized she wasn't just cheating on me, she was trying to completely erase me from her life and ours. I felt betrayed, furious, and helpless all at once. How could she do this? How could she lie and manipulate her way out of everything with such ease? The emotional toll was huge. I went from feeling numb to pure rage. I'd been a good husband, maybe not perfect, but I worked hard, paid the bills, kept the family together. And now I was watching her destroy everything. For her own selfish reasons. The pain of knowing she'd been lying, cheating, stealing, and planning to leave with our kids was almost too much to bear. I kept asking myself if I'd missed the signs, if I'd failed somehow. But I knew one thing: this wasn't going to end quietly. I was going to fight for what's mine, for my family, and for my dignity. I refused to let her walk away with everything without a fight. The next few days were a whirlwind. I spent every free moment with my lawyer trying to figure out my options. Honestly, I felt like I was in some kind of nightmare, one where every move I made was met with more betrayal. Emily kept up her act, pretending to be the innocent victim in her divorce filings, claiming I'd been abusive, manipulative, controlling. She painted herself as the wronged wife, the one who was just trying to find happiness elsewhere. She even had the nerve to tell mutual friends I was dangerous, that I'd hit her during one of our arguments, which is a complete lie. Meanwhile, I was digging into her plans more thoroughly. I hired the private investigator to follow her, and what I learned was chilling. She'd been meeting with her lawyer behind my back, preparing to transfer the house into her name, and she had a plan to leave the country with the kids, probably in the next few weeks. I found out she'd been talking to an immigration lawyer, setting up documents and making arrangements to get passports for the kids. She thought I wouldn't catch on, but I was one step ahead. That's when I found out she'd been secretly withdrawing more money, far beyond the initial $250, $0. She'd been funneling tens of thousands into a new account, probably to fund her new life abroad. She was planning her escape in secret, and I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. How could she do this? How could she betray not just me, but our children? I was furious, but also heartbroken. I'd always thought she was the love of my life, and now I saw her for what she really was: a scheming, manipulative woman who'd rather run than face her responsibilities. I decided I had to act fast. I filed for an emergency court order to prevent her from leaving with the kids. I also requested a temporary restraining order on the house, because I knew she'd try to transfer the title to herself or someone she knew. The court date was set for just a few days later, and I spent every hour preparing my case. I was furious at her, furious that she'd lied, stolen, cheated, and plotted behind my back. But I also felt a strange sense of clarity. I knew I had to stand up for myself and for my children. I couldn't let her take everything, especially not our family home, which is worth over $1 million. The night before the court hearing, she called me, bitchy as ever, trying to guilt-trip me, accusing me of trying to control her, saying I was abusive and possessive. She told me she was doing what was best for the kids, that she deserved happiness, and that I was just a controlling idiot. I listened, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her she was selfish and manipulative, but I kept my cool. Inside, I knew this was just her latest tactic to try to win the legal battle. When I finally saw her face in court, I knew I had to fight harder than ever. I presented all the evidence, emails, bank statements, the private investigator's report. I argued that she was planning to leave the country with the children without my consent, that she'd been stealing from us, and that her claims of abuse were false. The judge listened carefully, and in the end, he granted the temporary orders I requested. She couldn't transfer the house, and she was prevented from leaving the country with the kids until the next hearing. I felt a small sense of relief, but I knew this was just the beginning. That night, I sat alone in my house, staring at the walls she decorated, the life we'd built. I felt hollow. All the trust I'd had in her was gone. I kept replaying her lies, her betrayal, and the way she'd manipulated everyone around her. I was angry at myself for not seeing it sooner, but also angry at her for being so selfish. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let her destroy what's mine without a fight. I was determined to protect my family, even if it meant fighting her all the way to the end. The days that followed were a blur of legal battles, sleepless nights, and a constant feeling of walking on thin ice. I had managed to get the temporary restraining order and stop her from transferring the house or taking the kids out of the country. But I knew this wasn't over. Emily was relentless. She was already scheming her next move. She played the victim in every conversation, insisting she was doing what was best for the kids, that I was controlling and abusive, and that she needed to escape her toxic marriage. It was infuriating, but I kept my composure, knowing that every lie she told was just more ammunition for my case. I started to realize how deep her deception went. She'd been planning this for months, maybe even longer. She'd been secretly talking to lawyers, setting up new bank accounts, and working on the paperwork to transfer the house. She'd even bought plane tickets under fake names, all while pretending everything was fine. The more I uncovered, the angrier I got. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind, trusting her, loving her, thinking she was the woman I married. Turns out she was just a master manipulator, and I was the fool who didn't see it coming. But the most shocking part was discovering her plan to leave the country with our kids. She'd been talking to a lawyer in Canada, trying to figure out how to get their passports renewed without my knowledge. She'd made arrangements to fly out in less than 2 weeks. I felt sick. How could she do this? What kind of person plans to run away with her children, leaving her husband and everything we built behind? I knew I had to act fast. I contacted an international lawyer and started preparing for a custody fight. I had to make sure she wouldn't get away with it. In the meantime, I also found out she'd been secretly withdrawing more money, tens of thousands, from additional accounts she'd opened. She'd been draining our savings, probably to fund her escape. I felt betrayed all over again. How could she be so calculating, so cold? It was like she was willing to destroy everything, including her own children's stability, just to run away with Mark and start fresh somewhere else. I kept asking myself how I missed all the signs, how I failed to see her true nature. The pain was overwhelming, and I couldn't help but feel like a complete idiot for trusting her for so many years. I decided I couldn't sit back and do nothing. I needed to fight for my family, for my rights, and for the truth. I hired a team of lawyers, private investigators, and financial experts to gather every piece of evidence I could. I wanted the court to see her for who she really was, an unfaithful, manipulative woman who was willing to lie, steal, and cheat her way out of her responsibilities. I also started documenting everything, every call, every message, every suspicious activity. I was determined to build a case strong enough to stop her from taking our kids and our home. The emotional toll was intense. I went from feeling numb to furious, then hopeless, then determined. There were moments I doubted myself, questioning whether I was doing the right thing. But deep down, I knew I couldn't let her get away with it. I had to protect what was left of my dignity and my family. The thought of losing everything, our house, our children, my life as I knew it, kept me awake at night. But I also knew I had to stay strong for my kids, for myself. I refused to let her win, no matter how much she tried to manipulate the situation or paint me as the bad guy. Then came the day of the next court hearing. I was nervous, but I felt ready. I had all the evidence, all the facts. I knew I could prove her plans were malicious, that she was trying to abandon her responsibilities. When I saw her in court, her face was smug at first, but I could see the flicker of worry. The judge listened carefully as I presented everything. I told him about her secret accounts, her plans to leave with the kids, the stolen money, and her false accusations of abuse. I made it clear I was fighting to keep my family intact, to prevent her from running away with our children and destroying everything we'd built. After hours of arguments and presentations, the judge finally ruled in my favor, at least temporarily. He issued an order preventing her from transferring the house or taking the kids out of the country without my consent. I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. I knew she'd appeal, and I knew she'd try to find another way around the court's decision. But for now, I had bought myself some time to regroup, to plan my next move, and to prepare for the long fight ahead. I looked at her across the courtroom, and for the first time in a while, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could hold on to my family and stop her from destroying everything. The days after that court victory felt unreal. I was walking on eggshells, knowing Emily was already plotting her next move. She wasn't the type to take defeat lightly. I could see it in her eyes. She was angry, desperate, and more than willing to burn everything down to get her way. I kept my guard up, watching every move she made, every phone call, every suspicious interaction. I knew she'd try to find a loophole, some way to bypass the court's orders and continue her plans behind my back. Meanwhile, I was pouring everything I had into preparing for the inevitable custody fight. I hired a top-notch lawyer who specialized in these kinds of cases, and we started building a comprehensive dossier on her: financial records, communications with her lawyer, evidence of her secret accounts, and proof of her plans to leave the country. I also made sure to document my interactions with her, especially the times she was manipulative or outright lied. Anything that could help me prove that she was unfit or that her intentions were malicious. I also started talking more openly with my friends and family. I needed support, and frankly, I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. The betrayal was so deep and the pain so raw that I wondered how I was going to survive this. I'd always been a stable, responsible guy, worked hard, paid the bills, loved my kids. Now I was fighting to keep my family together while she was trying to tear us apart. It was a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. One night I caught her sneaking around the house. I wasn't even surprised anymore, just furious. I followed her into the garage where she was trying to hide a small bag. When I confronted her, she spun some bullshit about running errands, but I knew better. I demanded to see what she was hiding, and she finally snapped, screaming at me, calling me paranoid and abusive again. I told her to pack her bags, that I'd call the police if she didn't stop lying and trying to manipulate the situation further. She stormed out, but I knew she was just biding her time, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The worst part was realizing how far gone she was. She'd become completely unrecognizable, bitchy, manipulative, and cold. She'd even started gaslighting the kids, telling them I was dangerous, trying to turn them against me. I couldn't believe the woman I'd loved for so many years was capable of this level of cruelty. Every day, I felt like I was losing my mind, fighting not only her but also my own despair. But I refused to give up. I knew I had to stay strong for my kids, for myself. I kept reminding myself that I was fighting for their future, for the stability she was trying to destroy. I worked tirelessly with my lawyer to prepare for the custody hearing, knowing that her ultimate goal was to take the kids and run. I was determined to prove she was unfit, that her plans to leave the country with them were malicious and selfish. The day of the custody hearing finally arrived. I was nervous, but I was also ready. I had all my evidence organized, proof of her lies, her secret accounts, her plans to leave, and her manipulative behavior. I presented everything to the judge, emphasizing how she'd been planning to abandon her responsibilities, how she'd been stealing from us, and how her intentions were clearly to run away with the kids and start a new life somewhere else. I made it clear I wanted full custody, at least until she could prove she was capable of being a responsible mother again. When the judge finally made his ruling, I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. He granted me temporary custody, with supervised visits for Emily. He also ordered her to stay away from our house and to refrain from taking the kids out of the country. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was enough to buy me some breathing room. I knew she'd try to fight back, but I was more determined than ever to protect my children and keep her from destroying our family. That night, I sat alone in the quiet house, feeling both drained and oddly hopeful. I'd come a long way from the naive guy who never suspected his wife was capable of such betrayal. I'd learned a harsh lesson about trust, deception, and resilience. I realized I couldn't control her actions, but I could control how I responded. I had to stay vigilant, keep fighting, and never lose sight of what mattered most, my kids and my integrity. I knew this battle wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever came next. I refused to let her win. Not without a fight. The months that followed were the toughest I've ever faced. After winning the custody battle for now, I knew Emily wasn't giving up. She kept pushing, trying to find ways around the court orders, making subtle moves to undermine me and constantly gaslighting the kids. Her bitchy attitude only intensified. She'd call me names, accuse me of everything under the sun, and twist the truth to make herself look like the victim. Honestly, I couldn't believe how far she'd fallen. This wasn't the woman I married, not anymore. I kept my head down and continued building my case. I worked tirelessly with my lawyer, gathering more evidence, texts, emails, witness statements from friends and family. I wanted to make sure I had everything in place if she ever tried to take the kids or the house again. I also started to focus on my own mental health, seeing a therapist to process all the betrayal, anger, and sadness. Some days were unbearable, but I knew I had to stay strong for my kids, for myself. One day, I finally got the call I'd been waiting for. Emily had been caught trying to transfer the house into her sister's name, hoping to hide assets and make it impossible for me to claim my rights. The court swiftly intervened, freezing her assets and forcing her to come clean about her plans. She was furious, calling me every name in the book, accusing me of ruining her life. But I didn't care anymore. I'd already learned that her words were just lies, smoke, and mirrors. My focus was on protecting my children and making sure she didn't get away with her schemes. Over time, the court granted me full custody with supervised visits for Emily. The judge saw through her manipulations, her lies, her theft, her plans to run away. I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. I'd fought so hard to keep my family together, and now I was doing my best to rebuild from the wreckage she'd left behind. The house, which I once thought was our sanctuary, now felt like a battleground. But I was determined to turn it into a home again, one built on honesty, stability, and love. Looking back, I realize I learned some hard truths. You can't trust everyone, even those closest to you. Betrayal cuts deep, and sometimes people you love are capable of terrible things. But you also learn that resilience counts. That fighting for what's right is worth every sleepless night and every ounce of pain. I found strength I didn't know I had, and I refused to let her destroy what I fought so hard to protect. Now I'm focusing on my kids. We're slowly rebuilding our lives, creating new routines and making sure they feel safe and loved. I still get angry thinking about everything she put us through, but I know I can't change the past. All I can do is move forward, wiser and more cautious. I want to tell anyone out there going through something similar, trust your instincts, fight for your family, and never let anyone make you feel small. Sometimes, the biggest battles lead to the greatest strength. And in the end, I know I'll come out of this stronger than I ever imagined.